I'm happy to
Hi,
connect with you
Solai.
after a
Good
long
evening.
time. So
Hello. So finally we have blurring and blurring out and blurring in, but it's getting proper now.
yeah. So let me just try to stay kind of stable so that I don't get blur more often.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
good,
Stable.
good.
Stable is
Nice
a
to see
keyword.
you. Yeah. So good to be have a next catch up. To see you all in next catch up. So just to today's agenda mostly around sharing some sort of an experience, about the recent conference which I attended, and then followed by discussing some sort of data breach incident or some other cyber security incident which has happened
Yep.
recently. Even I also won, Venu, so maybe I can just touch upon them at high level. Yeah, and then we can close it up with some sort of positive words. So again, aligned on our objectives of this podcast. Yeah. Thanks everyone for tuning in. So
All right.
myself, Solai Kumar. Um, so I'm a security practitioner. So moving back to the experience. So this is one of the first cybersecurity conference which is in Chennai, especially, right? There are so many conferences which happen around the world. Maybe even in India, if you take mostly in the major cities like popular cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, and so on. There used to be a lot of kind of events, right? So you'll have Bangalore chapter, we'll have Mumbai chapter, and so on. That organized by IC Square, Isaka, and so on, right? I think that is when, I think these people, the group of people, I would say dignitaries who just, thought through this for a couple of months, I would say more than a year. There is some sort of an effort which has been put in the back end. So, and then after that, they have arranged, they made this particular show. So I found it quite useful overall. So maybe I'll just go one by one. So the time it has started, it was around the actual time is around 8 o'clock in the morning, but I think actual session started at around 9:30. So all kind of an agenda, right? Overall agenda is introduction and so on. So just getting into the actual cybersecurity topic. So we have people from different background, I think, who have been part of the roundtable session. So there are various topics which has been discussed, right? So a couple of them includes, for example, data privacy, right? Data privacy in the digital era. So that is one of the key topic which has been discussed. There are some privacy experts who have joined the panel and discussed about how privacy is important and we are doing as a country from the privacy perspective and the other kind of country specific privacy regulations and impact and so on. What are the practical challenges of meeting the privacy by design principles, right? So all those things have been
Yeah.
discussed,
Especially,
and
I guess, in India. Uh, uh, Especially, sorry to cut you off, Solai. I think, especially in India, because one, I personally think we are not very savvy when it comes to privacy. Security, to an extent, we are actually going up there. But privacy is something we are not actually as savvy as this one. So I hope there was some key takeaways from the session.
yeah, I think the key takeaway from this session is like I think like you mentioned, right? I think especially from overall Indian mentality perspective, right? So we tend to give more more our data, right? Who whenever we go to shopping mall or anywhere, right? So you tend to give your mobile number when they ask, okay, give me your mobile number, you just directly give it, right? And recently I also faced such incident, right? So key takeaway from this session is overall like the privacy is important and also at the same time it is an individual rights. So how we are going to implement it, especially the DPDP rules, which has been recently enacted, right? I think it is still in the draft stage. I think it is, I would say, it has not been completely formalized, but still the DPDP rules is evolving. And there are a lot of kind of restriction about the way how you handle the data, though maybe kind of similarities between the GDPR and the DPDP rule in terms of the naming and so on, right? The data fiduciary they will say in DPDP and then data controller in basically GDPR and so on, right? So overall, the discussion is about how to, understanding the individual rights and then mitigating risk and then the embracing responsibilities and so on. The group of CISO, I think there are some couple of CISO also have joined this panel. My key takeaway is like the regulation is evolving day by day. So they the government is also trying to regulate the way how we do the business and enforcing a lot of restrictions. At the same time, the threat is also evolving, right? So it is, they see, I think when AI come into the picture, maybe AI come into the equation, right? Artificial intelligence and then other machine learning tools and Gen AI tools will come into the picture. So it is going to further complicate, the overall privacy, the principles, right? Meeting the privacy principles. Another aspect they talked about is the quantum computing, right? So how, quantum computing and the quantum capabilities have impact on the privacy. For instance, when we say the native encryption algorithm that we use, so when the quantum capabilities are real, so it could basically crash in a day or two, right? So that's one of the key takeaway, right? So from this data privacy kind of panel discussion perspective. So with this, I will take a pause here. Maybe any questions, specific questions on this,
Oh, yeah,
Sai?
plenty of them. I don't know. These days I've become like a curious person in asking questions. So, any discussion happened, Sola? Because I think one of the contentious point, which at least I see from a privacy side, especially in India, is the data sovereignty, keeping the data within the borders. I know India came heavily on that, but later there was some two-way communication between industry and government as well. So they started relaxing a little bit because I know, Sai, even in Australia, I can pretty sure understand that data sovereignty is pretty big ask, especially if it's government or defense contracts
Yeah,
within Australia as well. So every country is looking for that. Uh, and it becomes a challenge, especially when it's a cloud player, an IT technology like Azure or AWS. They do provide such services, but at the very high expense bill is going to be attached with that. So any discussion happen on data sovereignty, Salah?
Yeah, I think they have touched upon the data sovereignty as well, right? The way how do
Mm.
we make sure the data sovereignty can be met in terms of the to meet this overall country's sovereignty, right? So I think there was more discussion around data localization, for example, storing those Indian data within India's, Indian premises and then European data in European premises and so on. I think they have seen in some sort of three angles, right? One is your data privacy, the regulations perspective. Of course, this is data localization is also part of your regulation, right? So for example, if you're processing you individual's data, then which means you're obliged to store their data at their land, right? Basically, it's a law of the land. And they also shared one good
Not
experience.
necessarily, so like not necessarily. GDPR does have a transfer, data transfer as well across the borders, but you still have to comply with the GDPR compliance, the requirement, the six principles, right? I don't know, I forgot what are six or seven principles. So if
Yeah,
you're
data
complying with that, yeah, data
minimization.
can move, but
Yeah,
yeah, need for use only for what is required for, and
purpose
data
limitation.
deletion,
Yeah,
various things are there. Even I forgot what
yeah,
is the sixth principle.
yeah.
But data localization is not actually mandate, at least in GDPR. India had that, but I think they've diluted the clause, is what I heard last. Although I've not seen the finer print, and
yeah,
I know it's still not rolled out yet. But in Australia, I know, especially defense and various other things, there is a strict mandate. So they enforce it
there is.
contractually, and even regulatory wise as well, they enforce it. I know Australia. So
That's
India,
correct.
yeah, it is still in fluid state. We'll have to see how where it lands, how it lands.
Correct, correct. And in Australia, the as you rightly said, Venu, so what they expect is like, for example, if there is a defense, project and they are engaging some cloud provider, right? So they want Azure and AWS within Sydney or Melbourne. That's the first requirement. They don't want any of the data living to US or Europe or any other country without the standard contractual clauses and without the review being done. Now, that is a challenge that all the companies in Australia are facing as well because most of the companies, like the infrastructure monitoring, the data, even AWS has to send it to the US. Unfortunately, that's where the entire actual expertise and the layer of monitoring lies. So it is becoming a big challenge now, and somewhere they have come to the fact that some metadata or some metrics will be accessible from the US, but the actual data, right, the citizens' data or the defense data, that is something which will be stored locally.
Yep. Yep.
Um, Again, because from the privacy angle, what is important is the PII. That is what they're concerned about, the PII of the Australian customers. And that is what GDPR also is concerned about, right? I mean, the other operational data, they are fine with it. They don't worry much about it, but it's only the PII that should not, leave the country. I mean, if it leaves the country, it should be through the standard contractual clauses in place and making sure that, you ensure that the adequacy of the controls of the sub-processor, they have the equivalent level of controls as you would have as a data controller. So that sort of, vendor assessment and making sure that the sub-processor and, all the other sub-processors involved in this entire engagement needs to have the sufficient controls in place to protect the data. So Australian Privacy Act 1988 is one of the prominent acts in Australia, and it has got APP 8 principles, again, closely aligned to GDPR, very closely aligned to GDPR, but again, not as strict as GDPR in terms of fines. So, yeah. And one other thing which I would like to point out here is, I don't know if you have been across this, but recently, US has come out with an executive order where they would not want any of the US based companies' customer, like US customer data being accessible from China and Hong Kong. And there are certain other countries, Iran, they are called sanctioned countries, eight
Or
or
offset
10.
countries, or was it offset countries or something? I forgot the term what they use.
Yeah, no, they say sanctioned countries.
Okay.
Yeah, sanctioned countries, Iran, Cuba, and some 8 to 10 countries. And they have asked all the companies to make sure to revise and review their accessibility and make sure that, the US customers' data is not accessible from these regions. And if it is accessible, again, they would like to take the same stand as GDPR. You make sure that you have all the controls in place as a US company would have. Now, this becomes really tough in China and the countries which are non-democratic because the internet is not regulated. Internet is regulated there,
Heavily regulated.
heavily regulated. So you never know. So that's a kind of challenge that always like I have been like last 1.5 month I have been working with all these privacy related aspects, like US, GDPR. Then Malaysia has got their own PDPA, Personal Data Protection Act. That is again one of the stringent private privacy acts, and it is very heavy in terms of requirements, the expectation. So I mean, somewhere I feel areas what I see is challenging is one is the awareness. Like many people in the company are not even aware. Like if you're signing a deal with Malaysia, they'll sign that deal and then they realize that we need to comply with the Malaysian privacy, and then they will reach out to legal and then they'll work on it. That is one. The awareness is a difficult aspect here. Second is challenging is to understand the actual requirement itself. That's a challenge.
Yep. I think it is privacy has evolved a lot because no more, at least 5 years back, privacy was considered part of security itself. The
Yeah,
CISO used to handle it as part of his role, but now we have chief privacy officer or you have privacy director
yeah,
carved out separately as a different role. And also
yeah.
when GDPR came, there was a lot of adoption issues as well, which they've ironed out. I think now no more it is just PII data. I think it's general PII, if I'm not mistaken, and sensitive PII. So general PII is
Right.
typically your name, email address, your postal address, those kind of things. Sensitive PIs is like mostly your health information or your
PHI. Yeah.
political views or your religious aspects or your orientation. So those form as sensitive PI. So there is little more
Correct.
stringent controls trying to control the sensitive PI compared to a general PI. And to your
Correct.
point, Sai, I think something called as data processing agreement is becoming common in contracts these days. Data
Yes.
processing agreement typically talks about privacy and a bit of security as well. The target,
Yeah.
what is it called? Technical organization measures, I guess, TOM or something it is called.
Technical and
It,
organizational measures.
yeah,
Yep.
it forms part of the contract, and then DPA is becoming quite common. So privacy is getting big, and privacy is getting a little scary. As you said, the biggest challenge with privacy is that lack of awareness. People still think majority of them that it's something related to security. It's not
Right.
a domain by in itself.
Yes. And one thing which, I'll tell you my experience. GDPR needs a DPO, right? Data Protection
Yep,
Officer. And many companies, without the awareness, they have tagged this role to CISO or head of
yep,
security,
right,
which is a conflict of interest. You can't do it.
yep,
So, as per GDPR, you need to make sure DPO is independent of the data processing activities, and a
yep,
CISO or a head of security cannot be independent of the controls implementation or data processing, right? So that is again one area due to lack of awareness. Many people have, put that responsibility on CISOs and head of cybersecurity, which now they are realizing it and giving it to some third party services, who offer DPO as a service.
Yep, yep, yep.
Yeah.
And also the
So they,
conceptual
yeah, sorry.
understanding of GDPR as well. Good, Solai. Let me finish my thought. So I was just saying that even the
Yeah.
GDPR considered strict because of those I dollar value or euro value attached to the fines. But those fines
Yep,
are not by default levied on everyone. It depends on the amount of due diligence you've done and how
correct.
much effort you put into take care of controls. If there is gross negligence, that's when that heavy fine comes into picture. If it is a minor negligence, because you cannot prevent a data breach sometimes or all the times, because as a famous saying, right, it's not matter of if, it's matter of when the data breach will
Well,
happen. So whether you've done everything that was required to be done, then the fines will be little lesser, and there is going to be lessons learned, and you go ahead and retweak your privacy program to fine tune what was the lessons learned from the previous data breach. So that's again a misconception, the fine and how it is levied.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
is where I think there is one more very interesting, I would say, advice, I would say, overall. Because when we navigate through different, I would say, landscape, for example, we are doing business, right? We want to, kind of increase our business across multiple countries, right? We want to kind of grow, right? So every organization want to grow, right? They want to gain more customer. They want to do high volume business. I mean, they want to, at the end of the day, why we are in business to make money, right? So when they, go to certain countries, right? So we have to follow the law of land. I mean, any country where they operate, right? So India will have certain regulations, China will have certain regulations, US will have certain regulations. So how do you manage all these things, right? Because the one interesting thing which they mention about the tiered model, right? The tiered, basically an organizational model. For example, when you talk about data, I would say team, for example, right? So you have a data protection officer, so who are located locally on each countries, right? They are have to manage the local law of land, right? So and then I think they will have to take care of all those obligations with respect to the law of land, and then they can report back to your maybe some regional or maybe some the global kind of data protection officers, right? So as they grow, for example, when we grow the business, right? So we might expand to some different countries because you have a customer base there. There is a lot of potential to grow. At the same time, you also need to meet those regulatory requirements, right? I think that hierarchical structure, which definitely help to navigate those legal and regulatory requirements, right? And making sure we're able to enforce those control which are required for the specific country. And another important thing which has been talked about is data retention. I think lot of time it has been kind of overlooked in terms of data retention. So there is one good example which they give. It's around, even take an example of your mobile phone, right? So maybe 4 or 5 years back, you might have got a lot of photos, videos, and so many other content in your mobile phone, right? How many time you access that particular content, right? It's very very rare, and how many
Rarely.
of them are quite useful, right? I think that point in time I mean, you might not use it. I mean, that is basically not required, or maybe some of them you could keep it as memory, but most of majority of them, right, it may not be required, right? So the same kind of logic applies in corporate world as well, right? So this has been pretty much overlooked in many organizations. So when you know retain the data, just put some specific measures. For example, when you have when you're dealing with cloud service provider, right? So there is some retention policies. So making sure that the retention policy is active, right? For example, if you are supposed to store for last 3 years of data, making sure only you have got the 3 years of data. It doesn't go beyond that, right? Again, it comes back to your data retention policies, and make sure you store in a secure manner. The data should be stored in secure manner. And again, it will have a direct impact on cost as well, because the more the data that you store, the more cost it will have a direct impact on cost as well. And again, there will be implications on the GDPR as well, right? Because when it comes to personal data, so the more data that you store, you have to make sure, because data is basically a treasure, right? For any kind of threat actors, right? So because data is a new age fuel, isn't it? So when they get an access to it, for example, again they would make any kind of demand. They may ask for ransom demand. they might spoil the reputation of the company and so on. So that is very important aspect which is overlooked. And the second thing is the suppliers. The third party is no longer a third party. That's what they say, like third party vendors, right? So because we have multiple parties, third party will provide, I mean, they take support from other party. That party will take support from other party. So there is basically a complete chain, right? Basically, it is a supply chain. That is why it
Sub
is called supply
processors.
chain. So when they process, for example, they are the data processors, right? So sub-processor will have another sub-processor, and that sub-processor will have another sub-processor. It keep on going, right? So we should have that, captured clearly. And one more important thing which they mention about is the security team's involvement at a very early stage. For instance, most of the time in many organizations that you might have seen, MSA would have been signed, DPO would have been, I mean, data protection agreement would have been, everything would have been signed, and then the security team will get involved, do reviews and so on, right? So we cannot make kind of much change, right? For example, even, to get the business, a corporate would have, signed, they would have some sort of predetermined template, and maybe the provider or a provider might come up with some other kind of template, and they might say, okay, these are the conditions that we have and so on. So they might have agreed all those conditions, and they might have signed it, right, without any kind of much kind of importance given on those agreement, right? I think that should be vetted through the security team as well, right? The architecture team, operations team, and so on, because they are the one who are going to basically meet the requirement. Because once you sign the contract, and if you are unable to implement or unable to meet the requirement, it doesn't work, right? So it becomes basically a breach of contract altogether, isn't it? So I think that is when they mentioned about reviewing those contracts MSA properly, and making sure you do, before kind of onboarding the vendor, do an assessment and making sure everything is intact, and then after onboarding also do an assessment and making sure everything in shape, right? So, and also do some frequent audit, for example third party audit, making sure they are consistently following the security best practices. So that is also very important, right? Yeah. So that is one of the key takeaway, I would say. One is
No,
the
you
structured,
touched all the
you
favorite
have,
points of me. Now, I was saying, Solai, you
yeah,
touched all my favorite points. Data retention, that's a big problem for everyone. Supplier management, I'll get to the Verizon data breach report, what the statistics I had to say a little later. But well said. Just my comments on data retention is that it's a problem which most of the companies face. One specific example I'll tell you. Let's say people have this inherent habit of not letting go. They like holding on to it, and that creeps into the corporate culture as well. Now, let's say there is a company, a job placement company, which has Sai's profile from 10 years ago, and they have Sai's profile from today as well, but they'll not delete the old
mhm,
Sai profile. Although they know that is no more in India, his number doesn't work, and his experience has changed. His CTC would have obviously gone 10 times or 20 times. Let's not get into that. But they still hold on to this one. So I don't know what's the point of that. And two, as you said, the more data you accumulate, the larger the breach is going to be. And when you look at fines as well, right? If you're unnecessarily holding on, like if your data is only about 100 people profile, but you have, I'm talking about Charan, but you have 1,000 people profile and you get breached, so you lost 10,000 profiles. So the fine for that is a lot more compared to losing this 100 people itself. So that's another thing. And two, even the performance of the systems get impacted when you're holding on too much of data. There are two kinds of data, right? One is structured data, which sits in your databases and various applications and various forums, even big data as well. And unstructured data is pretty okay, that is scattered across local storages. Could be a laptop, or could be a SharePoint, or could be OneDrive, or could be G Drive, or could be Dropbox, anything like that. Especially structured data, if you're just keeping on piling on data, the system performance is go down, and impact is going to impact the productivity as well. So that is something. And again, regulation also comes into picture. I think you can correct me. I think in Australia we have a regulatory requirement, statutory requirement. I guess you have to hold on to data for 7 years. That's a government requirement which you have to comply with. You cannot.
Yep.
But beyond that is up to your discretion. So you should not hold on. In India, I think there is
Yep.
again two levels. I guess if I'm not mistaken, 3 years or something is statutory requirement in India for financial records, if I'm not mistaken. So very important topic, data retention. You have to be lean and you have to be mean when it comes to retaining data. At the same time, you have to be supportive of business as well.
Yep.
Keep, sometimes you have to master data and archive it. for statutory requirement. At least that will actually strip down some of its core value and it'll give you some protection as well when you mask the data and archive the data. That's one. Coming to subprocessor, I think that's a very important topic as well, because when you go for a contract with the client or even who you're providing services to, they have a clause saying that this is my data processing agreement, this is my security clauses, this is my privacy clauses. Not only the infosec guy should get involved, the privacy person should also be reviewing those documents, whether we are actually meeting those privacy requirements. And they put a simple term saying that you and your subprocessor should follow that. So the onus is on you to take that same requirements and get it signed with your subprocessor as well, to make sure that they also comply and they also legally bound by what you're doing as part of the agreement. That's what I just want to do quickly chip on, but because these are my favorite topics these days, especially data retention. Go ahead, Salai. What's We spoke too much about data privacy today.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
I
actually
mean,
an interesting
yeah, I
topic, you
think we
know.
have,
Yeah.
I think very interesting topic. Yeah, yeah. So basically, it touch upon your individual
Yeah,
rights as well, right? I think we need to be very cautious. Yeah.
yeah,
Yes, I, you have got
yeah.
something?
And one thing what I would want to add, and many of the times this is not addressed is, the collaboration of security team with the legal team. It plays an extremely important role, and I myself have faced this challenge because, see, even, I mean, security team has to collaborate with the entire business, no doubt about it. But your collaboration with the legal team has to be more than the other business functions, because the legal will actually be involved in all this contract signing and everything, and that is when the legal needs to take the initiative and pull the security guy into all this contract signing process. So legal is kind of what do you say, a stepping stone for us, where he can, or he or she or whoever the legal team can help us in inserting into this contract review process and getting into the business actual, this review process. So that, I mean, I have faced this, I have experienced it, and it's a big challenge. But yeah, I mean, if you have a proper legal function, then definitely, the collaboration with the legal team is going to play an extremely important role.
Yep. Yep. Big partner when it comes to signing of agreements, both with
Yeah,
vendors as well as clients.
I think just to add that particular point, right? So it's a kind of balancing, right? For example, when you go for some vendor risk assessment, right? So before onboarding, so I mean, of course, you want to take some services from the vendor, right? So when you cannot spend too much time before onboarding. At the same time, I mean after onboarding also, because of course you can spend some reasonable time, right? But before onboarding, because you may have some 10 vendors who provide some sort of similar services, right? So you have to basically the efforts that it takes to do an assessment. For example, it will be in 10 folds if you involve 10 vendors. Five vendors mean 5 folds, right? So at the same time you have to get the outcome right and quickly, because in the kind of very fast world, so you need to meet those business demand quickly, right? So basically we have to touch upon more important areas, maybe not going through the extensive kind of an exercise, maybe just doing some important checks, maybe the important data points, making sure they meet that requirement, maybe kind of light assessment, making sure they are doing some sort of basic cyber hygiene, following some basic cyber hygiene. And then once you kind of the list will further gets filtered, and then and after that, once you finalize a specific vendor, then you can go for more detailed kind of review, right? So because our time is very
yeah,
crucial, right? So we are given a very less time within the less resources as well, because that is also being talked in extensive manner. So what is your cybersecurity's ROI, right? Return on
absolutely.
investment, right? So how do you prove it? So then whenever you go to board, they will ask you, so we have been functioning for last, more than 3 decades, and our customers are the same customers. So what are the value add that you're giving to us, right, to back to business? If it is sales, we can give figure. So if it is the cybersecurity, then I think you have to convince people by giving, not about
No,
convincing, basically you have to kind of,
no incident, no data breach till date is the value add, right? In
Yep.
30 years,
yeah,
you
yeah,
are doing the business if there is no data breach. That's what when I talk to I recently got an opportunity to present to the board. So, see, cybersecurity is very difficult to quantify the ROI.
yeah.
But if last 1 year there is no data breach,
And no
all my high
incidents.
vulnerabilities have no incidents. Touch wood, you guys should be proud of the security.
Yeah.
So, I mean. So, I mean, that's the straight away point, you know. So, and again, you know, this is again very big topic which definitely we should cover, you know, how we can quantify a CISO's, you know, value, or, you know, what are the metrics through which we can measure CISO's performance or a security program performance. That's a different, you know, conversation altogether. And again, touching back your point, so like, absolutely. You know, we like in general, what we do basically is as a policy, we make sure we have told our supplier management guy that no vendor will enter, like we should not engage any vendor who doesn't have a basic security policy. They should have minimum, like if they have ISO, well and good. If they don't have ISO, the step two is at least they have SOC 2, if not SOC 2, security policies or something, or as the standard security checklist, and you know, at least. So if these four are not there, don't even engage the vendor. That's a blanket rule.
Yep,
So
yep.
that's where, you know, as you said, you know, we'll save some time. And when they actually onboard someone who has all this, then we will get into the review because it's impossible to review, you know, 10 vendors, you know, review their checklist. That's not possible with the current, you know, resource constraints we have.
I mean, to your point, Sai, as good as relationship we need to have legal, we should have a good relationship with procurement team as well, or the supplier team, which
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
onboards this one. And there are companies which just take stance, so right to your point, saying that without ISO or SOC 2 certification, you can't even bid to our project. That's a stance they take. And then procurement time, you can structure it out saying that if it is a crucial project, this is the bare minimum. I need the guy to have security certification minimum. Then when it comes to you,
Right.
then you go, okay, yes, at least certification. That gives you some level of comfort for you to do an top level due diligence, not delve deep into that. But a guy without certification, you have to. I mean, I've experienced in my professional services work, actually, sorry, not services work. I've seen policies copied from some universities and shown as their own. When I read that, this one, I have this habit. I take a big sentence when I start suspecting, and I put a quote in that and go to Google and search. So when you do the search, it will show you from which document it
Like
has been pulled up.
catching a
So I've
fish,
seen a
huh?
lot of, yeah,
It's like
yeah, yeah.
fishing, huh?
I mean, it's like fishing because in my very first job itself, we used to draft this document. So we had a habit of going from some university and picking it up. So I had this one contractor agreement which we were preparing. Suddenly, I was reading through, my coworker had prepared it, and I came across a point saying that um, any dispute rising in this agreement will be solved in New Zealand. At all, both are Indian parties. How are you going to solve in New Zealand? Then
Standard copy and paste.
copy paste without doing due diligence. So that is important. So you have such vendors as well. So you have to be extremely careful. But with procurement, you set a
Uh,
clear guidance. If it is a big value customer, if it is a big value vendor, ISO,
Yeah,
SOC minimum. If it is small
yeah,
value, then probably you will look at this one. So you structure it in such a way that you control the toll gate itself and you make good utilization of time rather than spending too much of time.
yep,
Also, we
yep.
know the
And also, you
credibility
know,
of
I don't know.
certification. Sorry, sorry.
Yep, yeah, it has to be. What is the term we use? It has to be an active certification. It cannot be
Yes.
Yeah,
ISO
I mean,
certified in 2001 to 2002.
no, I think what there was someone said, I think in the session, right? There are some organizations who also sell certifications for the organization. For example, like they kind of a Kirana shop, right? So, very basically, mostly it happens, in my opinion, in some of the SME, a small or medium-sized business, where because it is a because we are focused on some certifications, right? So because they are making use of this opportunity, sometime what happened, they used to sell the certifications. I mean, this is a kind of one of the real example which they have, shared in the session as well, right? They just take all the control which has been listed, what they certified, and so on. And actually speaking, they have not practically implemented, right? Because of which they were getting a lot of spam emails and so on, right? They bombarded with a lot of spam emails, but still their controls and their, I mean, the document says they are compliant to all those certifications and so on, right? So later they realized, this is something which has been kind of not properly done, right? So basically, we need to like ISO checking the text box in terms of verifying the certification is one thing. On top of that, the credibility of the certification, right? That is very important. Who is the issuing body? That trustworthiness should be there because nowadays there are a lot of bodies who do an audit and they will issue a certification. They say no, we are ISO certified. It doesn't mean that they're following all the process as such, right? All the control which has been specified in the standard document. So of course there is an SOA, scope of
No.
applicability from the each standard that
Yep.
will be derived.
Exactly.
But
My point. So you don't, at least for ISO, you don't just ask for ISO certification, ask for SOA as well. So you need to see what controls were part of scope, what controls are not part of scope. So like that problem is there all across. My point is that yeah, there are companies which do this, but the percentage of the companies is very minimal. Now, when you get a Microsoft or a Google or somebody that stature, they're not going to fake the certification. It depends on the company. So that's where when you do a TPRM, one of the wrongly understood TPRM is like third party risk assessment or third party security assessment or third party security and privacy assessment. It involves checking their financials as well. So that's where you set a criteria. If the financial company is in like 10 crores, then they might probably, I'm not saying all 10 crore companies, but there might be chances of doing it. But if the financial of the company is 100 crores, the probability of them cheating is comparatively less. So that's why you put a structure over there. ISO doesn't mean that you pass the toll. ISO means that you get a lesser checks when you do an assessment before you onboard them. But non-ISO will have a deeper checks, as you said, using your time better, checking the
Yeah.
SOW and checking even their policies and see, looking at the PT reports, how frequently they're doing the pen test, at least a summary of this one, whether they're doing assessment. So you check those things, but check at a very high level if they're ISO certified. But if they're not, then you go a little deeper. So again, we can't cover 100%. We at least have to be there. It meets our this one due diligence, what we have set for our companies. Similar to
yeah,
students, right? Some people will pay and pass off and get the degree certificate, but good number of people even study and get good certificate. So it's there everywhere.
yeah, that's true. I think pretty much on time we are now. So any other thoughts, final thoughts before we kind of moving into the next episode? So we have a lot of things to cover. I just touched upon the uh, privacy part. I think we have around some 4 or 5 topics to cover. Maybe this cannot be. I
And it's going to
presume
become four
we
five
we need
episodes.
some 10 episodes minimum. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's the
I
first
think
one. I think another good.
yeah,
Mhm.
next week we'll pick it up. Good. Salai, I think
Yeah,
sorry I
sure.
cut you off.
So overall, I think my feedback around this session, because maybe when we tend to forget things right over the period of time. Overall, my feedback is a lot of expertise. People from different background and a different kind of domain. I think I felt it is really good. The reason being, we were actually discussing one day before, right, in our kind of meeting around attending some conference and so on. And suddenly I just looked at one website where they list on all the conferences which is happening around the world. And quickly I also found one in Chennai, that too physical event, right? So I just registered and next day I just traveled, right? I mean, my key takeaway, right, is like start being in a cybersecurity domain, right? So I think you need to start attending a lot of conferences, and I have seen a lot of students, I think, in this conference, right? I think there is some person, a few students from a reputed university who joined this session. So I think this kind of physical event will really help to make some new connections and also get some sort of new thoughts, right? And yeah, of course, the cybersecurity is all about collaborative effort, right? So collaborative intelligence, I would say, right?
Yep.
So intelligence gets shared across multiple people, then it will be kind of you will be able to share what you know the best, and then the other person on the other side will be able to also share what they know the best, right? Which means together it will be more, right? So that's the key takeaway. But
Yep.
though, I mean, of course, every session will have its kind of pros and cons, and of course, this is also not exceptional, right? So, but overall, I would say it is really good. So hoping that I will attend more sessions soon, and then yeah, we'll increase our network. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Very important. Very important. Thanks. Thanks. Salai.